Welcome, everybody, to the midweek episode. And this week in British history. I'm really enjoying doing these segments because I'm learning history myself, and it's really fun to look up events through history in the current week that we're in. So, of course, this week in British history, we're looking at Valentine's Day, but not as we know it today. So before the cards, the chocolates and the flowers, of which I hope you all get lots on the 14th of February, and the heart-shaped everything, Valentine's Day had a very different origin. And understanding that origin helps explain how it eventually became part of British royal life and why the 14th of February carries such different meanings across history. So the story centres on a Christian martyr named Valentine, believed to have lived in the 3rd century during the reign of Emperor Claudius II. According to legend, Claudius had banned young men from marrying, believing single men made better soldiers. Valentine, a priest, continued to perform marriages in secret, and when he was discovered, he was arrested and eventually executed. The date traditionally associated with his death was the 14th of February. Over time, the story evolved. Valentine became associated with not just martyrdom, but with love, loyalty, and devotion. And by the Middle Ages, the Church recognized St. Valentine's feast day, and the meaning began to shift from religious remembrance towards romance. And this is where Britain enters the story. By the late medieval period, particularly from the 1300s onwards, Valentine's Day had taken on a new life in England. Poets and writers, including Geoffrey Chaucer, began linking the 14th of February with the idea that it was the day birds chose their mates. That symbolism filtered into aristocratic culture, and soon Valentine's Day became associated with human pairing, affection, and courtship. It wasn't about commercial stuff, and crucially, it found home at the royal court. In late medieval and Tudor Britain, Valentine's Day became part of courtly tradition. Nobles and courtiers would draw names, exchange tokens, and take part in carefully staged rituals of affection and admiration. But this wasn't, of course, about romance. Nothing's ever straight up, is it? At court, everything had a meaning. Being chosen as someone's Valentine could signal favour, loyalty, or rise in status. It could strengthen alliances, it could shape marriage prospects, it could influence who stood close to power. Sounds like school, right? When you'd all have a bit of competition with each other, who got the most Valentine's cards and who didn't get any Valentine's cards. Gifts were personal and symbolic. Jewellery was exchanged, embroidered gloves, posy rings, engraved with short messages. Your ears peak as a metal detectorist at this point. Miniature portraits, decorative tokens of affection. These were objects meant to be kept, treasured, and carried. And they're exactly the kinds of personal items that sometimes find their way into the ground and centuries later into the hands of us metal detectorists. By the Georgian period, the tradition had spread beyond the court and aristocracy into wider British society. Printed valentines became appearing. Romantic customs became more widespread and personal. Capitalism, but their roots were here in royal recognition and courtly life. Valentine's in Britain wasn't born in the shops. It grew out of relationships, symbolism, and the rituals of power. Love expressed carefully and publicly. And that brings us to the other side of Valentine's Day, because history rarely lets a date belong to just one meaning. The 14th of February also marks one of the most dramatic and violent moments connected to British exploration. The death of Captain James Cook. Cook was born in 1728 in Yorkshire. The son of a farm labourer, nothing about his early life suggested he would become one of the most famous navigators in history. He began working on coal ships out of Whitby, learning navigation and seamanship through experience rather than privilege. Those ships were tough, practical, built for endurance, and they shaped the kind of sailor he later became. He joined the Royal Navy in 1755 and quickly stood out. Cook was precise, calm, methodical, exceptionally skilled at mapping coastlines and navigating difficult waters. His charts of Newfoundland were so accurate they were used for decades. At a time when Britain was becoming the dominant naval power of the world, Cook represented the new face of exploration, scientific, disciplined, and observational. His ships, including HMS Resolution, were converted Whitby colliers, thick-hulled, stable, perfect for unknown seas. His crews included sailors, Royal Marines, scientists, artists, and astronomers. You had to take all these folks back then. You didn't just have a camera you could whip out. These were not just voyages, they were floating research expeditions. Cook's journeys expanded European knowledge of the Pacific, charted coastlines, recorded plant and animal life, and changed global maps. But exploration and the empire were always closely linked. By the late 1770s, Cook was on his third great voyage, searching for the Northwest Passage and charting further reaches of the Pacific. That journey brought him to the Hawaiian Islands, then unknown to the Europeans. At first, the encounter was peaceful. There was trade, curiosity, contact between cultures that had never met before. But tensions grew. Disputes over stolen equipment, misunderstandings, the strain of prolonged contact between very different societies. Cook made a decision that had worked elsewhere. He attempted to take a local chief hostage to force cooperation. Surprise, surprise, not the best way. It escalated. On the shoreline, a confrontation broke out, and on the 14th of February 1779, James Cook was killed. The man who had mapped oceans and pushed the boundaries of knowledge died in a moment shaped by cultural collision and imperial presence. His legacy is complicated. He wasn't a slave trader. His voyages were not organized around slavery. He was a navigator, a scientist, an explorer, but he was also an officer of the empire. The routes he charted opened the Pacific to future colonization, trade, and settlement. The world that followed his journeys reshaped indigenous societies forever. So history holds two truths at once. As a pioneer of science and navigation, and Cook as a figure tied to the expansion of the British global influence, both part of the same story, and both tied, in a strange way, to Valentine's Day. One Valentine rooted in love, courtship, and royal tradition in Britain, another marked by violence, misunderstanding, and the realities of exploration. For those of us interested in history through what survives in the ground, both of these stories leave traces. The royal traditions produce personal objects, rings, tokens, jewellery, small expressions of affection, and the Age of Cook produced global movement, naval artefacts, trade goods, coinage, materials travelling across continents. Both changed what ended up in British soil. Both left stories waiting to be rediscovered. And that's what makes the dates of like the 14th of February so powerful in history. They carry multiple layers: love and loss, connection and confliction, tradition and transformation. So when we think about Valentine's Day, it's worth remembering that in British history, it has meant far more than romance. It reflects who we are and who we were becoming. If you've enjoyed this midweek look at British history, make sure you're following the podcast wherever you listen. And if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. I hope you all have a wonderful Valentine's, whatever you're up to, whether you're planning a nice solo night in with a couple of beers, or whether you're hanging out with your nearest and dearest. Happy Valentine's. I'll be hugging my metal detector. Speak to you soon. Just keep digging.